Hey everybody, and welcome to the first episode of my United States GeoGuessr Tips series. The United States is notoriously tricky when it comes to GeoGuessr, but there are endless ways that you can learn and improve. When I first started playing GeoGuessr back in 2017, I usually got perfect scores in the USA in about an hour. But with lots of practice and a love for this country's geography, I am now the world record holder in several American categories. So with all of that said, let's get into some of the most essential tips for geoguessing the United States. If there are any very basic and essential tips that I don't go over in this video, please leave them down in the comments for us all to read. But with all of that said, let's get started. One thing that people always ask me about is how I can recognize blurred out license plates. This is definitely a really tricky skill to pick up, but with enough practice you can get there. If you didn't know, all 50 states have their own unique license plate designs, and since GeoGuessr is based on Street View, license plates are everywhere. In my opinion, they're often the most critical clue for identifying the state you're in. I will go more in depth about each state's license plate designs in future episodes, but just to give you an idea of how diverse and distinct they are, here is a map of the main plates used in each state. You'll notice that some are pretty distinct, like Vermont's bright green plates, and even ones that are mostly white do have distinguishable features that show up when blurred. Another key component of American license plates are the front license plate laws. Some states require cars to have plates on both the front and the back of the car, while some states only require back license plates. This map shows the law in each state. Very generally speaking, most southern states don't require front plates, while most northern states do. The exceptions to this pattern, like Texas and Michigan, can be really helpful in many situations. For example, if you're in a toss-up between Oklahoma and Texas, Texas requires front license plates, so if most cars have them, you're probably in Texas and not Oklahoma. Interstate highways are the largest, most important cross-country highways in the United States. Their numbering system is organized in a logical pattern that you can memorize to help make those pesky highway rounds a lot less confusing. To start, all interstates have a number. Even-numbered interstates like I-90 and I-10 go east to west, while odd-numbered interstates like I-95 and I-5 go north to south. There's another numbering pattern here too. Going from south to north, interstate numbers get larger, and the same thing happens when going from west to east. The patterns I just described are for the main interstates. These will have just one or two numbers. 3-digit interstates are spur or auxiliary roads, meaning that they branch off from a more important interstate. The last two numbers of these interstates will refer to the interstate that they branch from. For example, here in Chicago, I-190 is a spur road which branches off from I-90 and goes to O'Hare Airport. An important note is that while there are many unique 3-digit interstate numbers, some of them do repeat, especially for larger cross-country interstates that pass by many different cities. When you come across an exit sign on an interstate, the exit number is very important to helping find where you are. Most of the time, those exit numbers are labeled on Google Maps, and they also follow logical patterns. The vast majority of states assign exit numbers based on how many miles along the interstate from the state line the exit is. West to east interstates have exit numbers that increase going east, while south to north interstates have exit numbers that increase going north. A handful of states follow the same directional pattern, but just give numbers sequentially, so that the third exit in line is exit 3, even if it's 20 miles from the state border. These sequential exit number states are almost all in the northeast. Another tip for interstate exits is that they usually have useful information. If you're traveling down an interstate and come across an exit, it's probably worth following it, assuming that there's coverage and it's not blurry Gen 1 potato can. Exits almost always say the interstate number, sometimes the shields have the state name on them, and signs for either side of the entrance ramps point out the two big cities that you're in between. Now for some random tips about the interstate system. Arizona is the only state with a kilometer-based interstate. I-19 south of Tucson uses kilometers for its exit numbers and mileage signs. So if you see signs that are not in freedom units, you're in Arizona. Hawaii's interstates are all numbered like H1, H2, and so on, so that's a simple thing to keep in mind. Lastly, you can sometimes see these green-colored interstate shields. These are business routes. They act like spur interstates, except most of them are on surface roads and pass right through towns and cities. the number will be the same as the interstate they're connected to. For example, I-90 business and I-25 business in Buffalo, Wyoming are both connected to the normal I-90 and I-25 respectively. Sometimes Google Maps indicates these business interstates on the map pretty clearly, but other times it's not as obvious, so keep that in mind. Another prominent feature of the national highway system are US numbered highways, which are like interstate highways, way more common and less fun to deal with cousins. The odd number and even number pattern is generally the same here, with odd numbered highways going south to north and even numbered highways going west to east. However, the increase in number pattern is the opposite of how interstates work. Odd numbered US highways increase going west, and even numbered US highways increase going south. To make things even worse, 3-digit US highways don't always follow these rules. For the most part, like interstates, 3-digit US highways are spur roads, meaning that, for example, US 201 is a spur road coming from US 1. However, 3-digit highways are not always short like in the interstate system, so they often break the directional rules. And US highway numbers have been removed and changed so much throughout their history that some US highways seemingly have random numbers. Take, for example, US 412, which runs from New Mexico to Tennessee, found many miles from US 12, US 2, or any other highway that it could even feasibly be a spur road for. So there are definitely some confusing aspects to US numbered highways, but patterns do exist, just be careful. Business routes also exist for US numbered highways. These work exactly like business interstates. They have the same number as the highway that they branch off from, but are usually surface roads which pass through towns. Their shields mention business on them pretty clearly, so they're quite distinct from the regular highways, and there can be a few variants of these shields. There are a few random but very useful tips for US highway shields that I found. First of all, US numbered highway shields in California will say US above the number. This is exclusive to California as far as I can tell, but if you've seen it elsewhere, comment below. There's also this green variant of the business route shield that, from what I can find online, only appears in Maryland and Georgia. Again, if you've seen it in other states, let me know in the comments. Each state also has its own highway system, and each state uses its own highway shield for these roads. A lot of them either have the state outline on them or just straight up say the name of the state, or both. But some of them are more abstract, and some states do use the same shapes. They're pretty easy to memorize though, and this map is a great way to do that. I will go over these in detail in future episodes as well. The landscape of the US is what gets to people quite a lot. Since this is the introductory episode, I'll really quickly describe the main landscape regions of the US. In future episodes, I plan to go region by region, explaining a few states at a time, so expect some much more detailed landscape guides then. To start, there's the West Coast, which is much more Mediterranean looking in California. You'll get tropical plants, palms, rugged hills and mountains all up and down the coast. In Oregon and Washington, things get more green and less tropical looking, with more coniferous foliage. The Southwest is the main desert region of the US and generally looks like this, with shrubs and cacti galore and mountains, buttes, and mesas in the distance. This kind of general landscape can be seen everywhere from eastern Oregon to western Texas. The Rocky Mountains are some of the tallest peaks in the country, and this example location is from Colorado. You get these kinds of views with coniferous trees, grasses, and bare mountain peaks from New Mexico up to Montana. The plains are famous for being mostly flat and full of wheat and cows. This landscape, like the others I've mentioned so far, changes a lot with latitude, but you can see something that looks kind of like this anywhere from Texas to Montana. The Midwest is kind of like the plains, except with greener crops and more trees. This kind of flat agricultural landscape is common in more southern states in the Midwest, like Illinois and Indiana. The northern parts of these states, especially around the Great Lakes, get much more forested and populated with more pine trees than people. The South and Gulf Coast are home to large stretches of southern pine forests and rolling hills. These trees are distinct from other pines with their clusters of branches at the canopy, and tall, mostly branchless trunks. These kinds of trees are found all across the southeast from East Texas to Virginia. The southern Appalachians and their foothills are part of the south too, but these mountains don't get extremely tall, which is a good way to tell them apart from the Rockies. Of course, closer to the coasts and in Florida, tropical plants are more common, and it gets flatter and more agricultural here too. The Northeast is also pretty forested, but with more deciduous trees and a mix of pines too. Lots of hills and mountains can be seen here, but like the South, the Appalachians don't reach very staggering heights. The farther north you go, up into states like Maine, the colder and more coniferous things get. Lastly, the Mid-Atlantic is like a crossover between the Midwest, South, and Northeast, featuring a little bit of everything really, depending on where you are. American post offices can be extremely useful clues, especially in small towns. If you're trying to figure out the name of the town you're in, or at least the state, many post offices say the city, state, and zip code right in front in large letters. This can be a great way to figure out the state in lots of situations. Usually, post offices are on the main street of small towns. In larger cities, the post offices are less likely to display the city name prominently, since there are probably multiple post offices in that city. America loves their flags. You'll see the stars and stripes just about everywhere. Each state also has its own flag, and while these are not nearly as common, they still get flown, especially in front of public spaces and large buildings such as city halls, hotels, and parks. Some states are also very prideful in their flag, and so you're more likely to see it around. This includes states like Texas and Maryland. Here's a map of all 50 US state flags, and as you can see, a lot of them are very similarly designed with a dark blue field, so it can be tough to identify them sometimes. As always, I'll go into more detail on each state's flag in future episodes. Area codes are also extremely useful in American GeoGuessr, especially in cities. There are lots and lots of area codes across the 50 states, and there aren't really any patterns to them, making memorization very difficult. A good place to start though is with larger cities. These can be easier to memorize because they usually have numbers that are lower, such as 312 in Chicago. These numbers were given to big cities back in the day because it was easier to dial them on rotary phones. Another good place to start with area code memorization is with states that have just one statewide area code, such as South Dakota. There are quite a few of these states, and so memorizing them makes it a great way to identify a state right away. Otherwise though, best of luck to anybody who takes on the daunting task of memorizing all of these area codes. Knowing the state abbreviations can also be quite useful for GeoGuessr, since you can find these in a bunch of different places across the country. They're pretty easy to memorize, since all of them are just 2 letters, and most of them are pretty intuitive, such as NH referring to New Hampshire. Lastly, let's talk about what maps you should play so that you can improve your United States skills. The official US map from GeoGuessr is famously not good, mainly because it includes many blurry locations taken with Google's Gen 1 Street View camera. Because of this, all official world records and many people in the community use Simi's United States No Blurry map. As the name suggests, there aren't any blurry locations. The locations on this map are hand-picked, and every location has landmarks that you can use to get a perfect score more easily. An important note about this map is that it only includes the 50 states and Washington, D.C. Territories like Puerto Rico and Guam will not appear. If you're looking to learn some clues that are specific to certain states, I have a map called US State-Specific Clues, featuring hundreds of different clues. Each state has, at the very least, its state highway shield, state flag, and main license plate featured. There are a lot of obscure clues thrown in there too, such as New York guardrails and Texas asphalt. We'll talk more about those kinds of things in future episodes though. There are also lots of user-created urban maps to help you get familiar with American cities. I recommend Radix's US Cities Population 150K+ to practice larger cities, and Orange Juice's An Urban America to practice everything from small-town Kansas to New York City. I'm also working on a US cities map, and I'll have more details to share about that soon. If you're looking for a map with some incredible and not commonly seen landscapes, I suggest Sagittarius 998's map An Extraordinary US, which features some beautiful scenes from across the country which you may not get to see on other maps or even in Google Street View. That's all for episode 1 of my US GeoGuessr Tips series. There's plenty more to cover in future episodes, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Again, if there are any really basic tips that I forgot to include, please share them in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.